All right. Hi, everyone. Today, I'm really excited about this conversation because I haven't done anything like this in a while. I stopped doing interviews and conversations and just been doing solo episodes on the podcast, but I'm so obsessed with this school and I'm so obsessed with the mission and the founders and the vision that I have to share this brilliant community with all of you. My intention is to introduce you to Lindsay and Jamal and the Freedom Community School mission, but really for your heart inspiration, for you to see a path forward in your anti-racist work that will be going on for the rest of your life. It is not a one and done. There's no checklist where then now you're anti-racist and you're good to go. You will not be getting a certification. It will be a lifelong practice of awareness, of messing up, of being open, of giving money and giving your power and giving your voice to other people. So that's what today is about, is just sharing this amazing school mission purpose. Lindsay, I want you to start, or Jamal, either one of you, whoever wants to start, tell us about the school, tell us about why you're involved with it, and just pass the mic.
I can start and tell a little bit about this school. Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Pleasance. We're really excited to be here and to share a little bit about our community. So we're the Freedom Community School, and we're a tuition-free private school in Washington, D.C. Because of COVID, we'll operate online for our first year. And then we have a building in Southeast that we're excited to move into as soon as it's safe. And this school project came sort of out of the ashes of a charter school community where a lot of us were students, parents, and teachers. And most of the people in doing the Freedom Community School met at that charter school. And had a lot of alignment around our values and the ways that we wanted to be working with young children and the ways that we wanted to resist the racism that's inherently built into the charter school system. And after a lot of shared disappointment around the direction the school was moving in and the things that were being asked of us as students, parents, and teachers, to collude with those racist systems around standardized testing, around criminalizing young people's behavior rather than trying to understand it, and around the ways that teachers are asked to coerce and manipulate children, and the ways that parents are sort of disenfranchised and excluded from process around supporting their kids. A group of us decided to leave and start our own community school. So that's where the idea came from, and that's where we're starting from.
Yeah, I'm Jamal Gray, even though my name says Cairo Gray. Cairo Gray is actually my son, and he's the reason I'm here in support of Freedom Community School. Like Lindsay said, we are all a part of this community around a certain charter school in DC. And like Lindsay, I'm a native Washingtonian as well. And I've got to experience a lot of different styles of schooling in my time in DC. And so it's important for me that we kind of look to new ways of exploring education. I mean, especially in these times, but, when we're talking about breaking down certain systems of oppression, I think it's really important that we start with the younger we can with our students. And so that's part of the reason why, Cairo's mother and I and the other parents have kind of rallied around this vision that Lindsay has set out. And we were also, our kids were also students of Lindsay's. And so we saw her attention to detail and attention to pouring into the children in a certain way that we could see direct results from instantly. So, it was easy for us to say, all right, have a sense of confidence in her vision. And I think it already aligned with how a lot of the parents were already either raised or looking to raise their families, or so yeah, that's why I'm here in support of our children and community, and also in support of radical change. And it starts here with the kids.
Mm-hmm. How old is Cairo?
Cairo is 7, and he was going to the 2nd grade. So
Amazing. I have a 9-year-old son, so
Oh, tight.
I love little
I'm on my
boys.
way. I'm on my way there.
And he just turned 9, so but he really acts like a 3-year-old or 4-year-old most of the time.
I got the reverse. I have a 7-year-old that thinks he's 17 or
Oh
something.
yeah. Is he older? Is he the only one or the oldest?
He's the only. He's
Yeah.
the only
So
right
mine has an
now.
older sister, so that's why he's very
Okay.
like, baby,
Yeah,
baby bear.
I'm the baby, so I
Oh,
understand
you
the
get
conflict. I feel for him.
it.
Yes, at 9.
It drives his sister crazy.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Okay, you touched on this a little, Lindsay, but I would love, so people who listen to this podcast typically got involved through yoga or Ayurveda or wellness, or have gone to one of my retreats or, something like that, where they kind of are, I would say in general, in a very status quo, waking up to how racist our educational system is.
Right.
So can you guys think of any specific examples in either the schools that you were in, again, without naming anything or, shaming anybody, but really bringing to light some of the examples of what you guys saw or experienced around specific racist practices that are so inherent in the system?
Yeah, I guess I can go. Something we've talked about before. I think for me, I've gotten the experience of being at DC public schools, a private school in DC, and a charter school for high school. And I think most importantly, and it'd be relevant to what we're seeing right now, is like this dynamic between authority and discipline and what that means and our relationship to that. And, the earlier we start exploring that and the earlier we kind of establish that, a more open and considerate kind of relationship and dynamic between children and adults specifically, then I think we can kind of shift a lot of what we see in regards to, how in general we grow up viewing authority figures, and disciplinarians, and specifically for young Black women and men. That dynamic has been crucial, like the presence of police in certain schools, or the punitive approaches to rules, I guess I could, for lack of a better word, but just like the punitive approach, I think for me was very damaging early on, and it can kind of make, especially if learning is the goal, then it makes it harder to like build up that trust and establish like, a loving community if punishment and discipline are kind of rooted in these very kind of violent systems. And yeah, so I've seen a lot of people, a lot of my peers who that was a barrier for them, especially when school is essentially like a home away from home as much time as we're spending there. So considering there's a lot of different dynamics that are happening at home, kids bringing those to school, there has to be like very careful approaches to, how we treat certain behavioral issues or certain, mental issues, mental wellness, and all these things. Like all of it is relevant to, I think, that dynamic between teacher and student, or teacher and parent, or parent and child, parent and student. And it's got to be some sort of like synchronicity and also some sort of joined thinking around that, and I think that's what the approach that Lindsay was. It's like, and it's why it's important for us to look at each other as collaborators in community, not just teacher, parent, student. Like we're all kind of building this together. And I think that should be the standard period in like an educational setting, because it's, it's where kids spend so much of their time. So if that makes sense.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think, specifically what we see a lot of in schools is a replication of the carceral system, which is incredibly intentional. It doesn't just happen to look like a prison, it's designed like a prison. And in effect, funnels tons and tons of folks into the prison system. And the prison and policing systems are inherently and historically systems of white supremacy created to control and brutalize the bodies of Black and Indigenous people. And schools operate in the same way. They use the exact same set of logic. So if you do something that is not in alignment with the expectations of the community, and those expectations are set by adults, often white adults, and those expectations are incredibly specific, what information you're going to get, what you're going to do with your body, exactly how you're going to sit on the carpet, when you're going to sit on the carpet, when you're going to study, what you're going to study. And if any breach of those expectations happens, we immediately move into a punishment system. So exclusion, you're in timeout, then you're kicked out of the classroom. If your body doesn't do exactly what white adults are saying your body needs to do, and this is even in schools where the administration is, majority people of color, because those expectations are set from above that set of administrators. And these standards are largely nationwide. And you see them even more deeply in schools in Black neighborhoods where people come in and decide, like, we have to control these Black bodies. We have to have more discipline. We have to have, more, they call them, rigorous expectations. But what they mean is we have to control your body down to where your hands go, so that your body will be compliant. And I think some of that is rooted in trying to keep Black bodies safe in a world that's incredibly violent to them outside of school. But when we do that, what we do is we teach young people to comply and to stay alive in white supremacy. And if we're going to do that, we need to also give them the opportunity to understand and to contextualize that that's what's happening, so that they also develop skills to resist and dismantle white supremacy. And so I think like Jamal and I have both seen tons of that in the schools that we've been a part of. And I've seen it across the board in private schools, public schools, charter schools. And I've seen it, much worse on, like, people are much more specifically targeting the bodies of Black students, the bodies of poor students, because those systems are created always to control those groups of people in an effort to maintain a capitalist machine that hoards wealth and power in the hands of white Christian men.
Yeah, and there's been so little, I mean, the way you describe it brings back so many of my years teaching in DCPS, where we had the X's on the carpet, that the kindergarten team, we all had to use the same thing. And I remember being like, but why? And it was like, get in line, lady, like, this is how we do it here. Right. This is how we do it here. So it was like a very visceral, when you were describing Lindsay, where I was like, yes, that is exactly what we did. And being curious about it, but not having the language. I was too young and naive and didn't know enough to have the language to push back where this was coming from, right? And how layered and steeped it was in the bigger culture that was happening. Because, I mean, again, let's be clear, a lot of any color, but specifically young white teachers who say, I want to go teach in DC public schools, or Philadelphia public schools where I did my training, like, it doesn't matter. We're not going in to say, I want to uphold systemic racism. Like, it was a very much, I want to dismantle this, but you get so caught up in the system, and there's no actual, when you do question or push, you get labeled an outlier or rebellious. And then, it's just a very interesting dynamic to now be able to have so many years behind and learn so much more and pull at it to say, whoa, I was such a part of this, like, white savior culture that I didn't even realize, and what I then was perpetuating. I remember one time we were filling out, this was really painful. They had them filling out like little bubbles, like the whole kindergarten team had to start with plain paper, write lines, and then have circles all over it and start filling in properly and filling in the sheet properly. And I kept being like, what are we doing? Why do we have to do this? And they were like, shh, low and guard, don't ask those kind of questions. And so we went to a staff meeting after school, and I said, I'm not trying to be rude or disruptive. I just don't understand. And they were like, when you fill out job applications, when you fill out forms, you have to know how to fill them out. And I remember driving home and being like, is that what we're teaching? Like, how to fill out forms? I'm not interested in that. Like, that sounds horrible.
And it's not just forms for a job application. I mean, what I think that's most directly connected to is a $4 billion standardized testing industry,
Yeah, yes,
which kids
yes,
are subjected to starting as early as, kindergarten. And
yes,
those standardized tests, the huge profit is made off of those, and profit that does not go to Black and Indigenous communities. And
yes.
the standards that are set by those tests, the knowledge that you have to know is also set by white people, and has nothing to
Yes.
do with the
Yes.
communities and contexts that most of my students have actually been in.
Yes.
And I think that's, and funding is tied to those. So it's all about money in the end, and controlling young people to make sure that they collude with this machine.
Yes, it was definitely for the testing. I just don't think the principal could say, she just didn't want to say that out loud. She just made it seem like this is a good thing for us to learn now. And I was like, wait, you mean you want them to do that for the future? So it was starting to connect those pieces. And that was part of an unraveling process that we are looking for. That's what I'm trying to focus on too, is like, what are we looking for? What is happening? We had a conversation in our neighborhood recently about what would equity in DCPS even really look like. We can't, it's so hard to even imagine that or envision that. And a lot of the people in my neighborhood send their kids to the local public school. But one of the discussions we had was, would equity, this is a question, not a statement, is would it be, so many kids in Southeast come over to this neighborhood for good schools and spend a lot of time commuting? Does equity mean many children from this neighborhood could commute to Southeast for some good schools? And you could see this physical reaction of people being like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
Right. I think even with that, it's like with the thought of having to add in travel or add in any more obstacles to like a proper education. If you just think about that thought alone, like I used to take the bus from Northwest to all the way to like Capitol Hill to go to Capitol Hill cluster schools.
Mm-hmm.
And, so that means I have to wake up earlier. Me and my mother have to wake up earlier. That means, will we have breakfast this morning? We may not have time to make it for breakfast. So I'm already at a disadvantage because I'm tired. I'm on the bus. It's loud. It's confusing. So you got to think about, and I think, if we look at the history of like districting and redlining, that it's very strategic to set things up in that way. And even the pushback with busing early on, it's like there are very strategic barriers in place to to stop economic and educational equity and equality, and that's clear. And I mean, even in DC, in a place where, of course, we can say, for however long the political establishment has been, led by Black people and brown people and people we consider to be allies, but then there were also larger barriers, from higher up than local government because of, the way our government is set up. So I mean, I think DC is one microcosm for that, but there's, a lot of examples we could point to. Now it's more like the technological gap too. You add that on and what that means, especially when we're switching to like a virtual learning experience, how many people are going to get left, how many kids are going to get left behind just off access. And of course, there are certain programs that are helping to bring the technology in the homes, but then you add the layers of whatever's going on in home, like the dynamics at home, which could be another barrier. For some, going to school is an escape from whatever's going on at home. So right now, I think we're going to be in a much more even unique situation where certain problems are going to come up and like, wow, okay, it's new barriers. But, another reason why I'm here in support of the Freedom Community School is like, how do we look at those not just as barriers, but as opportunities to kind of evolve the system and move out of that kind of standardized approach to learning and to community building.
Yeah. I'd love to hear that. Okay, so now that we did a good job of saying all the things that were not working or going well, tied to money, capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, privilege, all of those things. What are you guys most excited to implement and bring to life at Freedom Community? What are you so excited to practice and share and do? Like the evolution of taking all of that we know isn't working and bring to life.
Yeah, I think there's 3 significant ways in which our school is really different from any other schools that we've been a part of. And these 3 traditions are old and have been tried many times in different ways, and we didn't invent them. but we don't see a school in DC right now that's using them together to create a freedom-based education. So one of those systems is child-led project-based work. So there's lots of schools in DC that do that, but they cost $30,000, $40,000 a year. They're all in Northwest. They're completely inaccessible to folks who have been systematically kept away from wealth. So we're allowing students to like choose what they learn and choose how they demonstrate to us what they've learned. So each unit, students do a project that they design or at their developmental stage that's appropriate for them, and they demonstrate to us like what they've learned around our themes. So Jamal's son is incredibly creative, sort of philosophical young artist and poet, and I'm sure he'll create a lot of beautiful plays, paintings, poems to show us like how he's integrating the themes that we're studying in school. And we use descriptive review as an assessment practice, which is a way of just narrating what we're seeing young people doing, as opposed to using any kind of standardized rubric to grade and compare their work. So it's an anti-competitive way to just objectively look at what young people are creating and follow their perspectives. So a progressive education rooted in Deweyan ideas. That is, absolutely not a new idea. My great-grandmother ran a progressive school in the 20s, but it historically has been intentionally not available to non-wealth hoarding students. So that's one. Then another that's really, really important is using a political framework of transformative justice. So creating an alternative to policing and prisons, and an abolitionist framework in our classrooms as opposed to a carceral logic. So that means that any and all hurt and harm and conflict in our community is resolved through like ancient practices of restorative circles, and through a deep learning for adults and children around Marshall Rosenberg's work in nonviolent communication, so that we have the skills to actually name what we're feeling, what we might be needing that's not happening, and make a request of the community to support our need to be met. And so that's just, an incredible alternative. I know that there's been a big initiative in DC public schools in the last few years to bring that in. And I've seen it really fall flat in terms of its actual implementation due to a lack of like deep understanding of it as a philosophy and as an alternative to carceral logic. I've seen tons of teachers trying to use both. So we're really trying to create an alternate, option and give kids a lived experience of being in a community where we don't punish people and we don't coerce people. And I just think the implications of that are like literally unimaginable. Like having young people go through that experience through their whole elementary school, like imagine the organizers they'll be for abolition in 15, 20 years from now, not just having studied it, but having like seen this works. So that's another one of the things that we'll be doing. And then the third is to intentionally and explicitly teach about systems of injustice, and how they have historically always been resisted, and empowering young people to participate in that resistance. So there's so much about systems of injustice is about invisibilizing and is about not telling the stories of that being what's happening. And definitely not telling the stories of all the ways that humans have always organized against irrational systems of injustice. And so we make it really clear in our curriculum by telling the truth about what happened and using age-appropriate ways to develop critical thinking skills about the society that we're living in now, and tons of like empowering kids around their own significance and changing that. So those three systems, again, like all of those, have been done and are done in different places, but we don't see an elementary school in DC that's doing those three working together right now.
Yeah. I'm curious, Jamal, what Cairo thinks about going to Freedom Community. Has he said anything about it? Does he understand those systems? Are they looped in on the intentionality of it?
So interestingly enough, the pandemic actually gave us the chance to kind of explore what that dynamic would be like. And so Lindsay led like a small group of students who would end up become like the core of what the school is. And they were doing basically virtual learning, and it was all students that, you know, are coming from the charter school community that were students of Lindsay's. And, you know, I think for me, that I can't say what his full understanding of it is yet, because I think it's new, but I mean, a lot of things that will be addressed is like stuff that we talk about at length with him already, like his mother and I. But of course, there's only going to be a certain level of understanding for it. And so realizing that it's going to have to be like a more structured, but still liberated space, but like a more structured and like drawn out way of explaining those things. Because even a lot of these concepts are hard for adults to clearly understand and grasp as the truth, you know? And that's kind of why we are where we are now, is because we have adults, some that are unable to really grasp these truths, and some that are in denial, and some that realize that their positions are literally due to these systems being in place, and they don't want that quality of life to be threatened. So when you have those elements, you know, then you have what we have currently. But I think, you know, like the time we're in is unique because it's like forcing us to sit down. It's forcing us to kind of separate ourselves and look at what's essential. And so, and then like this virtual learning, I think it removes some of like the social distractions that I think for him kind of were getting in the way of like learning. And I think, you know, for me at least, it's really integral in like in building identity and building confidence. Like, you know, there has to be some sort of seeing reflection and like a space for them to actually be heard and hear themselves, and also see why the work that they're doing is important, like in a real way, outside of just, it's important because I said you have to do this.
Right.
And I think that's a part of the approach. And so he may not fully understand yet, but I definitely see the results of that approach in his learning, even over the past few months when we first started doing the virtual learning group. I think it's been transformative so far. So my thinking is like, okay, well, if we look at a longer approach, and when you're not dealing with the same kind of urgency that you have to in like a normal kind of school setting, and it's not the same constraints and stresses on the teacher even, then I think the results would be much better. And I think it's less like pushing on efficiency in these kids, in these, you know, not like a robotic approach to teaching. And I don't think that the standard approach works for everybody. Like, humans aren't standard. So when we're talking about small humans, we can't approach them with like standards and like ideas that were pervasive in the turn of the 20th century. It's like we're in a whole nother time. We have to approach education, and we have to approach care differently than the people who laid out the structure of, you know, the standard kindergarten to high school, you know, whatever. And we have to make it accessible as well. And so, yeah, I don't think he understands that yet, but, you know, I think it's more for him to get a chance to understand himself in these settings. I think that's what he's going to get the chance to do, you know?
What a gift, right?
Yeah,
What a
for sure.
gift.
For sure.
I think some ways that I just wanted to share a few like ways that I think young people sort of understand this stuff. Like, so from Cairo, Jamal's son specifically, like one way he articulates it is he says like, I like our Freedom Community School because it's fun and we don't do boring work. So I think that speaks to like child-led project-based work. It's like,
Right.
the main complaint that kids have about school is that it's boring, right? And like, he understands it as fun. That's like really, really key to him being able to continue learning. I think something else is like one time, this was like when he was in kindergarten, but like he said to me that he said in art class, I don't ask why I have to do stuff because the teacher doesn't care if we're free.
Yeah.
But, and this was actually a tense moment between him and I, where he was really interrogating me about why he had to do something that I needed him to do. But like, he and I had a completely different relationship around it being safe to ask me why he needs to do something, and him trusting that I'm not going to harm him, I'm not going to humiliate him, and that I'm going to do my best to calmly explain to him why I think it's important for the community for him to do this, and be open to it if he has a reason why he doesn't want to and he has a better idea. So I think like those are some small examples of how it actually plays out in a young child's mind. And I agree with Jamal so much that like adults don't understand this stuff. And like it's pretty complex. And I actually think kids understand it a lot better. Like kids have had less years of like being indoctrinated with like, this is the way it is. And so they're actually much more curious, open, and clear thinking about justice, about what's right. I mean, that's such a big part of kindergarten, right? Is like wrestling kids into compliance while they're like, no way, my body wants to be free. I don't want to sit in that chair. I don't want to do this boring thing. And like, they're really clear that that's not what they're supposed to be doing. And as they get older, they get more and more discouraged. They get more and more harmed by adults in schools, and they shut down more and more to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of my friends who run very, very large schools. Do you think this model can translate to huge numbers?
Maybe with a huge shift in ratios of adults and kids, and with a huge shift in training around how adults relate to kids.
Yeah.
I don't think that this kind of thing works well when you have one teacher and 30 kids. And that's actually why we have one teacher and 30 kids, is like Jamal brought up, like around efficiency, around like a school, you know, preparing children to be workers. And setting teachers up to have their best possible option be authoritarianism and not humanity.
Yeah. I mean, having experience like in my own learning, like huger classrooms and in smaller classrooms, I just know how easy it is to like slip through the cracks. Just off the human ability to pay attention to 30 people at once, like, and also approach them differently, like with different types of care, like we, you know, adults talk about love language and all of that. Well, it's not just a romantic concept, you know, it's also how we talk to each other, how we express things to each other, knowing what we can receive and how receptive we're going to be to certain things. It's like, it's impossible, you know, to do. I mean, not say impossible. I'm sure there are sweeping examples. There are outliers that like, yes, they've done great at it, you know, but I don't think that's the standard. And I know for myself, the times when I was slipping into oblivion because I just needed a different type of attention at the time. Or I knew that because the teacher was so occupied, I could manipulate the situation enough for me to skate by and not have to worry, you know? So it's not only about the teachers being attentive enough, it's like kids are smart enough to know when you're paying attention and when you're not, and what things are going to elicit what response from you. So at the same time, it's like, let's not discount their ability to, you know, sway around. And, you know, not that I don't think it's always bad for them to think that way, because you kind of want them to develop certain of those skills. But at the same time, if we're talking about like education, and at certain times, like we got to make sure that there's a dynamic where there's understanding happening. And it's just harder to establish with larger groups of people, you know? It's just like having 30 friends or 100 friends, and it's like you get on the group chat, everybody's talking at once. It's like, you know, it can be fun, but at the same time, how effective is it? What are we getting done in this time? And somebody's not going to be heard, you know, or somebody's going to be afraid to even speak up out of fear of not being heard. So all those dynamics. Can it work in a huge school? I mean, like Lindsay said, I don't know if you'd have to change the ratios of teacher to students. Also, that would be like having to shift societal consciousness to even accepting that, you know, and with that switching, that means you got to change some adults' minds, which is the real work, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
And I think it really just comes down to needs and resources. Like if you're going to have a community that centers humanity and that moves through process to hold people, you need the resources to do that. And teachers get set up so that they're in a situation where the needs and resources are just not balanced. Like I remember thinking, you know, in a kindergarten class, like, wow, we have just an abundance of hope in this room. There are 25 people in this room who are just incredibly hopeful about the world. And like, what a wonderful thing. And like, I wish we had more adults in this community that we could share that with, because, you know, we're out here, all the adults I know are despondent. Like, they should get some of this. And on the other hand, we got 2 people in the room that know how to tie shoes. So 20 pairs of shoes are untied. It's going to take us 40 minutes to get through that, because me and one other kid are the only ones who have that skill. And like, that kind of imbalance is very intentional. We're set up that way so that the only way to run a classroom is as if things were on fire and you're the drill sergeant. You know, like we get set up in an emergency situation as teachers, so that our best option for keeping kids alive is authoritarianism.
Yeah.
That's intentional.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, last question is, okay, so your dream is coming to life.
Yeah.
Ah! What skills and characteristics got you here? This was an idea that is now being born. So I want to be clear about what it takes, you both as humans, to bring this to life. I'm sure it hasn't all been easy. So what's really honed in you to step into this leadership and bring your dream and your vision to life?
I think the most important thing that we have is trust. So there's a group of people who trusted each other.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And we trusted each other across lines of race and class, religious orientation, backgrounds. And we decided to really believe in our relationships. And yeah, people have been asking me, you know, how do I do this? Like, how do I start this project? And my first question is just like, what are the relationships like? Do you have any? I don't think without that, we could have moved anywhere. So that's one big one. Jamal, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the trust is the big part, and also like vision, and I think all the parents are committed to radical change, and that's part of the belief. It's like, you know, I'm sure we all come from like diverse backgrounds, even the parents, you know, different geographically and economically, and educationally. So I think the thing that locks us in is like, oh, well, we're committed to some type of radical change. There's something about the way schooling was happening, even at a progressive, you know, seemingly progressive charter school, as, you know, supposed to be using restorative justice as one of its own templates. But in our eyes, at some point that commitment was not held up completely, you know? And so it's like, for us, I think there's a longing for something different and something more substantial, and, you know, trust in Lindsay's style of teaching, and a trust in what she's laid down as the ethos, you know, in conjunction with other partners and collaborators. But, you know, what they've laid down as the ethos for the school moving forward, and not just for the school, but for the world. It's like, we're trying out in the community, in the school setting. I think, you know, if you're trying to have some radical change, you got to start as early as possible in breaking the indoctrination. And so that's important. And, you know, we're here committed as collaborators, you know, as parents. It's a process, of course, you know, somewhat of an experiment, but at the same time, it's like, you know, if you look at, I think if you look at maybe the ways that we institute some of those same things at home, some of these same ideas and approaches with our children at home, you would expect, and you would at least want for the same things to be reflected in like an educational setting. And, you know, I think the principles that have been laid out are aligned with how we personally have operated, or, you know, what we've been raised on, or what we see as the best way to raise our children. And so, you know, that's why it's a purely collaborative thing. So here we are, excited. It's only a couple weeks out, though. It's exciting.
It's very exciting. It sounds like it's very much in alignment with who you are as a person, and again, those relationships and that collaboration and community, and that feels so good and energizing to have that alignment with the schools that we're part of, you know. Okay. Now everyone who listened to this is like, this is amazing. These people are amazing. The school is amazing. What would you like them to do now? How can we help build the community, sustain it? What's your ask, or what can we ask? How can we make this sustainable?
Yeah, well, I think a really important piece of this school is that it's tuition-free private. So we're tuition-free private because we do not want to be beholden to the DC Charter Board, because we do not want to have to subscribe to the racist standardized testing industry or all the other ways in which they influence what happens in schools. We want to be free from that to make our own decisions about curriculum and how we interact with young people. So that means we need to be a private school, and we're tuition free because we need to be accessible. That's a big part of our mission, regardless of access to wealth. So that means that we have to fund our entire school every year off of our own fundraising. So we raised all the money for the first year in the last few months. And I want to invite people into that project. So I think funding this school is like a really incredible piece of reparations work. If I can say just a little bit about the history of education, like, you know, early on in the United States, when Africans and African heritage people were brought here and enslaved, there were no laws to protect them, and white people were legally permitted to do pretty much like unlimited violence and brutalization to the bodies of Black people and Indigenous people, and there was very few regulations and limitations around what white people could do. And there was one really important law, which was that you could not teach enslaved Africans to read and write. And many of the students in this school are descendants of enslaved Africans, descendants of, you know, empires of Africa that were, you know, human trafficked and brought here against their will. And also many descendants of the Piscataway and Anacoshians that lived in the DC area. And that rule to not be able to teach them how to read and write was one of the few that was heavily enforced. You know, police were invented around enforcing rules like that one. And that's because the power of literacy, the power of learning was always known to be way, way, way too big to be able to give a group of people that would of course use it to completely resist, and did. You know, tons and tons of enslaved Africans and Indigenous people did learn it and did use it. And I think that, you know, that's the legacy of education in America that, you know, that hasn't gone away by now. It's, you know, we talk about something called an achievement gap, which is actually the failure of the American school system to educate Black and Indigenous people on purpose. And so I think, like, however people have access to wealth, it's tied to that history.
Oh, sorry. Cairo's checking in the chat.
You're fine.
Hello.
We were talking
Hey,
about you.
Cairo.
Say hello.
Hi.
Beautiful.
And that history.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
I'm so happy to see Carrie. The history is also just deeply connected to however people have money. However you have money, if you trace it back far enough, it's connected in some way to the exploitation and violence done to Black and Indigenous folks. That's almost always true for white folks that have money. So I think moving those resources over into a school like this is like an absolutely like liberating thing for people who have money based on that history, who know that history, to do, to shift those resources back into communities that have been, just historically blocked from that, from education and from wealth, through all sorts of the, you know, legal stuff that Jamal was talking about around redlining. And so I think it's a really powerful way for folks to step into reparations work and to step into community, like see what these kids can do. Mm-hmm. Like, you will be blown away if you come to our art shows. We had a poetry reading a few weeks ago. It was amazing, unreal. Like I'm hoping some of the work's gonna get published in the Freedom Fighters Black Youth Zine. So you're invited in to see what these young people are doing, what they're thinking about, and what's possible for them when the resources are there to provide them with rich materials, one-on-one instruction, a beautiful building. Like, all of that stuff has always been accessible to people with wealth. And the reason that people have that wealth is the violence and exploitation of Black and Indigenous folks. So it's just a really meaningful way, I think, to participate in liberation work, to shift your wealth over into this school.
Yeah. And you're going to have monthly contributions where people can keep that ongoing, so that relationship, again, it's not like a drop it, give, you know, I mean, of course you can give a lot of money and walk away. But I think, again, sort of in the model of community and collaboration, having an ongoing relationship, having ongoing money that you're giving for sustainability is a really beautiful way to really weave and thread, learn and grow and be part of something. Right now, while so many white folks are looking for ways to be helpful, quote unquote, or to do something, for me, this makes a lot of sense in terms of doing something, putting money there, shifting wealth, shifting power, and really understanding those systems that you were talking about, the 3 pillars that you guys are using in the school, just so that I can, again, learn and become a better human also, right? From all of that. As an adult, we were talking about how some of us are still working on, lots of us are still working on those areas. So any final thoughts, asks, anything you want anyone to know?
I do agree with a lot of what Lindsay was saying as far as like the empowering, education is a tool for liberation and understanding self. And I think a big part of why white supremacy and racism worked is you get a group of people to not understand themselves, disconnecting people from identity, and identity is so crucial in building confidence and also in imagining your own future, and so like imagination is definitely like a tool for survival. And when you remove that, then you have people that have to scramble in desperate situations to survive, or just have to go strictly with the position that the system allows them to assume, the role that's allowed for them to play, in contributing to the system as opposed to imagining what the world could look like outside of the system, And so that's one thing education and culture and art and all these things have allowed me to do, at least imagine it, even when the system may not always allow you to act or give you the proper resources to be effective and impactful in that. It's like we can at very least give kids the tools to think critically and imagine the world in a different way. And so, I'm in full support of that for everyone, not only for our kids, but for everybody. And for adults, not only for kids. I think adults have to reclaim that part of their imagination to see what the world can be,
So beautiful.
The freedomcommunityschool.org.
Yes.
That's what I was going to say. Where can they find you? freedomcommunityschool.org. There'll be links to it in the notes, in the description. And there's a newsletter, I imagine, or something where people can learn more about if you have open events or the poetry gets published, and we can really share that. And just kind of, I'm really just asking everyone, if you are still listening, to just envision wrapping your arms around the school. Like, let's just support them. Let's just bring them into our hearts and into our homes as they, really step forward into this first year. You'll never have another first year, another first day, and another first week. And so, like, I just want us to support you all in that work and really I want you to feel us energetically doing that for you. Like, we're behind you in all of the ways, because this work is so important. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pleasance.